One of the many significant changes between the HoloLens 1 and the HoloLens 2 was that the processor on the HoloLens 2 was significantly better, got a huge increase in computing power. So in this in-depth review today, we're going to be looking at the computing power of the HoloLens 2. According to Microsoft's device overview on the HoloLens 2, it utilizes a HPU custom designed unit for it. It also utilizes Qualcomm Snapdragon 850 computing platform. That is a really cool how Microsoft created their own HPU unit for the HoloLens 2, and this is actually the second generation of it. But how well does it actually perform? So today we're going to be testing that by looking at a few things while we do some stress tests on this computing platform. We're going to be doing a bunch of stress tests and testing things like temperature and how well it actually performs. So let's get into some of the tests. My first test is utilizing the Surfaces app. The Surfaces app has a bunch of different holograms, and some of those holograms have particle effects, and since particle effects are some of the harder things for a computer to process, I think it'll be a good stress test. Another thing that's good to note here is that while I was running this test, I was recording what I was seeing, and I noticed that just recording had dropped the FPS from 60 to 30. So that's one thing to take into account. The first and second test are being recorded, and that dropped the FPS in half. And the third test is going to have no recording, and it's just going to be a raw test as if you're doing the thing on your HoloLens. So that's how these tests were set up. I feel like it's interesting how recording it has made the performance that much worse, but we'll look at the results at the end. The second test used the Playground app. The Playground app was built for the HoloLens 2 to show off all the new features of the HoloLens 2. So it should be able to show us how the computing platform performs when the new features of the HoloLens 2 are being used. So this will show us whether the new features will affect any kind of performance on the computing platform. The third and final test was done using the 3D Viewer app. This app has a bunch of different holograms. Like you remember with the previous HoloLens, we had a holograms app. This is built into the 3D Viewer app, and they have a bunch of pre-built holograms. Some of those holograms have animations, so I was going to try and play a bunch of holograms with animations, but what was interesting is that the app has a built-in feature where it only lets you play one hologram at a time. I'm assuming it's doing this for computing power, which kind of makes sense. So that's kind of interesting. What's also interesting is that right off the bat, I noticed that without recording during this third and final test, the performance from the FPS at least was significantly better, but we're going to look at the data-driven results right after this. Here are the results from the first test using the Spheres app. So as you're watching this, you can kind of see how the CPU is for the most part staying pretty high up in its utilization. One thing that really kind of sucks is that we can't get a temperature reading from this basically task manager for the HoloLens. So this is the best we can do. We can see that as the CPU utilization increases, the amount of power that it's drawing also increases, which can only tell us that the temperature would have increased as well. So this is the data from the Playground app. We can see how the FPS is at 30, which we would expect because we're recording, which is a weird phenomenon. We can see that the CPU utilization isn't as much as the previous test. It is a bit lower. Which is interesting. I believe it's because there's less holograms to render, or the size of it is less. It also seems like there's less particles, which could have something to do with it. Again, we see the correlation between the CPU and the amount of power going to the CPU. Again, it tells us about the temperature. Looking at this test, we can see how this one being not recorded, how the CPU utilization is reasonably low, and also the FPS is significantly higher. That's one thing that's very interesting and a good thing to keep in mind, which is that when we're not recording, the CPU seems to be handling it great. Thank you guys for sticking around to the end of the video. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and like the video if you're interested in this series. Check out the playlist, it's linked down below if you want to see the other videos in this in-depth review series. And thank you for sticking around. See you in the next one.